Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Scrum Down NBC Sports Rugby podcast. I am your host with the most, Alex Corbs, and it's great to be back, everyone. Before we get into the bulk of this episode, few things I want to touch on. Big weekend for USA Rugby in the Sevens, men and women's coming in third place in Cape Town, backing off a strong opening round of the double weekend in Dubai, where the women got third and the men got fourth. That is really commendable. You know, when we talked about the Ross Young interview in the second one and some of the high performance reviews, you know, I mentioned that some of these programs would be under pressure because it's Olympic qualifying season. They'd had a bit of an up and down season last year, and I think you've got to give credit where credit's due. And I think, you know, to get those two performances in early in a big year, the women are sitting third overall in the table right now. That's good for Olympic qualification. The men are sitting in fourth as well. That's also good for Olympic qualification. That's some really positive sparks, and you've got to commend those teams. You know, Emily Bidewell and her side, you know, they've made some definite strides forwards. There still seems to be a little bit of a gap between them and maybe a couple of the top teams, but you know, to get that win for third place in Dubai against France was very impressive. The Fiji win, very impressive in Cape Town as well, I think, and it shows that the team is making strides forward, and there's some bright spots. I think Sam Sullivan coming into her own in that team, you know, adding some, you know, fresh sort of input and fuel to the fire there, I think has been exciting. And then, you know, some of their big name players standing up and having really good tournaments. The men as well continue. I think Aaron Cummins, you know, we were trying to get him and Nicole Heatherland on, because congratulations to her for her 30th HSBC Sevens cap, but unfortunately, just with their travel back being so ridiculously long, we weren't able to get an interview lined up in time before this pod had to come out, but maybe we'll try and touch on that next week. But I think, you know, credit is where it's credit due. It's really exciting, and I think the Sevens and USA are looking in a good place, and that's great news for USA Rugby, because it's been a tough time, as we talked about, with not making the World Cup qualification, and there's some more news coming out that USA Rugby head coach Gary Gold has decided to step down from his role, transition out through the end of the year. And there will be a high performance review like we talked about going on and looking into all of that. Dan Payne also moving away from his role in high performance and moving into other roles within USA Rugby. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. You know, we talked about some of the issues potentially with high performance, where the review would be, what the changes are. You know, I implore anyone who wants to learn a bit more about that to go back and listen to the two Ross Young interviews. There's a lot of information and detail about areas that need to be fixed and some hard questions that they got put under and answered. And, you know, for Gary, I think, you know, my heart kind of breaks for him. I think, you know, Gary Gold, as I tweeted, is such a lovely man. Honestly, one of the nicest people you meet in rugby. His heart and soul were fully committed to USA Rugby. You know, in 2018, he got them to their highest ever world ranking, beat Scotland, beat Samoa. 2019 World Cup didn't quite go to plan, and that was maybe probably the first little warning signs or wobbles under his era, but then really sort of, you know, hurt by COVID, hurt by lack of game time, and then trying to make up for that, you know, and it led to a very unsuccessful World Cup qualification bid, falling to Uruguay, falling to Chile, and then losing in the repechage. Didn't actually lose a game, drew with Portugal, which is heartbreaking to show how close he was to that. You know, this is sport, and there's some clear issues at the Eagles, and I think whoever takes this role forward, as Gary said in his comments, they've got to address the time together, the schedule. Will that sort of like Asia Pacific, you know, summer comp come to fruition for the USA? You'd hope so. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of planning and meetings going on at the moment and in the early quarter of the year to try and establish that and work that out. But I think for Gary, you know, he's one of the good guys of rugby. There's always going to be things as a coach, player, staff, people could do better, from selection to game plan to whatever. That's sport. You know, you never get it perfect all the time, but he's a really good man. He committed everything, and it's sad to see him go, but I also think he left, you know, a lot of legacy in place too, and I think this experience highlights the cracks and the issues that USA Rugby face, and whoever comes in now has got to be demanding a lot of change and controls and time together to actually implement a successful 8-year run into a home World Cup. So keep an eye on that story developing, also with what happens with the high performance review. But from all of us at the Scrum Down, our heart goes out to Gary Gold, a good guy of rugby and a great servant to USA Rugby. But now let's get into today's episode. There's been lots more going on in the rugby world. I think if you looked at last week's episode, we touched on a lot of the Eddie Jones news, him falling out as head coach with England. The succession plan seems to be coming into fruition. Steve Borthwick seems to be being lined up. And to discuss that and get through that, we've brought back Alex Lowe from The Times. He is the guy in the know, constantly writing and updating on this. We're going to sit down and go through all sort of the Borthwick saga of what's going on there, what it might look like from a coaching staff point of view, leading into England's Six Nations. And then we're also going to look at Premiership Rugby. Premiership Rugby had an announcement on Tuesday where it's focusing on sort of a relaunch, some new structural changes they're implementing, and a lot of detail coming out of that. So we thought we'd get Alex Lowe back on to sort of break through all of that. So let's get into it. And we are joined by the returning Alex Lowe, because there's lots of fallout and more developments and gossip to talk about after last week's blockbuster show with Chris Jones. We broke down the Eddie Jones news and him obviously being relieved of duties as head coach for England. And Alex, welcome to the pod. And I think we're probably going to be talking a bit more about the succession plans and what's going on there to start with.
Yeah, hectic week, Corbs, as every week seems to be in English rugby at the moment. Thanks for having me back on. Now, if I remember rightly, when we spoke last week, the RFU had just sacked Eddie Jones as England head coach, and they'd reached out to Leicester Tigers to request permission to talk to Steve Borthwick to be Eddie Jones' successor. Now, not a huge amount has moved on in that side of things, but we know for sure that Steve Borthwick is going to be the next England head coach. It's just a matter of the RFU and Leicester Tigers reaching an agreement about when he starts, most likely before the Six Nations, but also who comes with him from Leicester Tigers and when they join. Now, it feels like Kevin Sinfield, the former England Great Britain Rugby League legend, who is now part of the Leicester Tigers coaching team, feels to me like he will move with Steve Borthwick. There are other coaches at Leicester Tigers too. Alan Walters, who was part of the Springboks setup in 2019 when they won the World Cup. I'm certain Steve Borthwick will want him. It's just whether or not Leicester can afford to lose all that intelligence, all that brains trust to England straight away without it wrecking their season. They've got Richard Wigglesworth there too, player coach, who is incredibly highly regarded, but a young coach. You'd have played with him, but he's a young guy who is making enormous strides really quickly at Leicester Tigers. He may be of interest to Steve Borthwick. The word is he may end up with a slightly higher role at Leicester out of this. All of those discussions are happening, and there's no sign yet of an official appointment. All we know is that Steve Borthwick is going to be the man.
And how does it work? RFU probably have to buy Borthwick out of his contract. They have to negotiate a fee. I saw things on Twitter, but I don't know the validity of them, that, Leicester were asking for 500,000. England opened with 200 and something thousand. And I guess they have to try and agree a figure, which, if you're Leicester, you've got to understand that, RFU have no succession plan, really. They're kind of figuring it out as they go. It kind of gives Leicester a lot of leverage to hold on to their coach until they get a number that they want, especially when, just as you're touching on, there's going to be much more staff, it looks like, moving with Borthwick, not just one man, that it's quite a considerable impact to a club which has only just kind of got back to its stride of where it wanted to be after some dire times where they really fell back. And now they're not having their greatest season in the Premiership, but you feel like Borthwick and the change he's implemented there is only really in its infancy of growth and development. So it's quite a big loss for them.
Of course, you're right. So Leicester have always said they would never stand in Steve Borthwick's way if England came calling. They've been expecting this phone call since the middle of last season. Since everyone knew that the RFU were going to move on from Eddie Jones after the World Cup, Leicester have been expecting a phone call. They're working on their own contingency planning, but they were always planning for this to happen in the summer, or in the summer, in the sense that Steve Borthwick might have joined Eddie Jones' England set up at the World Cup. They were planning for Steve Borthwick's successor to join them in the summer. This has all happened a lot earlier than planning. So the negotiations are complex because, like you say, Leicester hold all the power, and when Steve Borthwick's representatives are discussing his contract, he holds a lot of power over the RFU too. But it's more than just how much will it cost to take Steve Borthwick away from Leicester. It's the other coaches as well, like we discussed. But there's also an element of Leicester, they're not flying as high as they did last season, but they won their opening Champions Cup game at the weekend. They're in the top 6. They're competing for a top 4. Leicester know that if they lose the core or even all of their coaching team, the impact that could have on their season and their prospects of making the playoffs in the Premiership or Europe are then impacted. That has a financial cost as well for the club. So it's a more complex negotiation than just the RFU saying, what will it cost for us to buy Steve Borthwick out of his contract? Which my understanding is lasts beyond the end of this season. So there are different elements at play, which is why it's taking a while for the different parties to all reach an agreement. There's time. The first England camp isn't until January. Richard Cockrell at the moment is in contact with the players and watching games. They've got some time, but they need to get it done within December.
And that's my next question is, okay, so say Borthwick is managing to come across pre-Six Nations, he gets in place, because you imagine he's going to want to pick that squad that gets announced in January. I know obviously Cockrell in charge now. Do you foresee any of his staff coming with him immediately? So do you think Simfield will be there for the Six Nations? And then, the sort of head of performance guy you've mentioned as well, like, are these realistic targets to get in for the Six Nations? And then if not, like, will it just be the continuation of Eddie's staff underneath Borthwick for that Six Nations?
My sense is that Steve will want to bring at least one heavy hitter with him. He'll want to walk in with the right-hand man, whether that's Kevin Simfield or Alan Walters. I would expect Borthwick to bring one of those with him immediately. He'll probably run more, but he'll understand, I think, that there may need to be a transition at Leicester, because he won't want to kill everything he's tried to build in that club. So my sense is he'll bring one right-hand man with him, and really depends who that is, might impact on how many of the coaches he keeps. One of the areas that fascinates me is attack, because Martin Gleeson, who Kevin Sinfield would know really well from rugby league, has spent a year, 18 months working, trying to implement this new style attack that Eddie Jones has talked a lot about, this sort of hybrid, fluid style of attacking where they don't stick to the pod system that lots of teams do, but each phase they reshape into different structures. That's the style that England have been working on. Now, one of the issues is we haven't seen it, certainly with any consistency. So Steve Borthwick comes in, and we know how methodical and strategic he is, and the kind of rugby that Leicester Tigers played last season as they dragged themselves from the lowest ebb of that in the history of that club to become champions. It was a kick, pressure, power game. So if Steve Borthwick walks in, where does Martin Gleeson fit into Steve Borthwick's vision for how to inject some life, I suppose, into the England team that's been struggling for so long? Those are the kind of big decisions that he'll have to make. Now, will he retain Richard Cockrell and Matt Proudfoot along with himself? I mean, how much of a hands-on role will Borthwick have in running the line-out, for example, which is his area of specialism, his real passion. You see him now as the head coach of Leicester Tigers, up his ladder, taking throws from the hooker in warm-ups and in training. He's got to make all of these decisions about how hands-on he'll be and therefore who he needs. I don't see him requiring Proudfoot and Cockrell. My understanding is that I mean, England statistically had the worst scrum of any top 10 nation in the world in 2022, and that's Matt Proudfoot's area. So
Wow.
I'd be surprised if he was retained. Cockerell could therefore take over some of the other responsibilities, forward responsibilities. These are the decisions that Borthwick has to make and has to communicate to the RFU, because they will all be part of this negotiation as to who he needs immediately, who he can wait for, and who he trusts to work with, and who fits into the vision that he will have for England. And so there are a lot of decisions to be made here. All the while, he's coaching Leicester Tigers through the Champions Cup pool phases. He's a man who's not shy of work, but he's got a lot on his plate at the moment. And he's done it before. He's coached England and the Lions at the same time. But there are a lot of decisions for him to make. And we know his great strength is clarity. He won't want a muddled situation as much as he can avoid it. The England attack system, a lot around England's play this year has felt muddled. He'll want to come in and clarify it. And therefore he'll want his appointments to be as clear as possible. And that's why I think he'll need a right-hand man coming with him from Leicester, just to help him implement that vision.
No, really interesting stuff. Like, obviously the England scrum, it's no secret, it's been under pressure. And I was very curious what would happen with Borthwick coming in. You'd assume he'd take charge of the line out or implement his system as such, at least in there, and have someone oversee it, but with his sort of detail, which I think is going to be a step up for England. I think they've missed him since he left in 2019 in that aspect. And I think reinforcing England's set piece is a key area that needs to be, rectified before the Six Nations for them to have a chance at a successful campaign. Because right now it's holding them back against the sort of the upper echelons in teams in those aspects.
I completely agree, and that's one of these fascinating areas about how Steve Borthwick will attempt to make it work with England. The Leicester model relied heavily on some powerful South African players. Julian Montoya at hooker. He can't recruit Springbok beef. He can't recruit Argentinian hookers to play for England. Do England have the players to allow Steve Borthwick to play in the way that he did with Leicester? That forward power, dominance, physicality, kick pressure game, or does he need to come up with a different strategy to suit the players that he has? And which specialist coaches out there could he bring in to help implement that vision? And that's one of the fascinating elements between now and the start of the Six Nations. Does he go back to Neil Hatley, who he worked so closely with England before? Ian Peel at Saracens.
It's a great shout.
Ian Peel has done a bit of work with England, really highly regarded at Saracens, scrum forwards coach. Does he go there? There are a lot of options for him, but he needs to find the right coaches to fit the vision that he has for England. And that's what we really won't discover. It'll start to be pieced together over the coming weeks, and then the Six Nations will be really where we learn exactly how he plans to try and get England moving between now and the World Cup.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating which way it goes. And, it's exciting too, because, we've seen, like, sometimes it's very hard to make any change when you come in as a new coach, but also sometimes you can make massive changes in a short period of time just because of that little bit of catalyst or refocus or reattention to detail, looking at like Eddie from 2015 World Cup to, coming in and being Six Nation Grand Slam winners. There is potential that this could go very well for England, have a new set of eyes, a new coaching staff, because there were some clear issues that we talked a lot about on the pod last week. I think probably the last question I'd ask you on this topic is, for Leicester, do they have a succession plan? Do you think they promote within? Do you think they now have to go out and recruit a new head coach, a new Steve Borthwick-esque caliber sort of figure? Because it was kind of a stroke of genius for them to get him into that role. And then, it paid dividends to them with a title. And now they kind of have to rejig the deck a little and figure out the next sort of move for themselves.
They definitely have a plan. Like I said before, that the plan was obviously geared towards the end of this season. But they have options. They need to know what money they might have available. I think recruiting someone mid-season from another club, it would be very difficult. I'm not sure you'd find many coaches prepared to do that. around the Premiership or over in France. But they definitely have a plan. And like I said, I got a sense Richard Wigglesworth, who still holds a playing registration, is still as fit and sprightly and effective on the field as he's ever been.
Unbelievable, isn't he?
Yeah, he's remarkable. And I spent some time at Tigers training last season, and watching him flick between training with the team to standing back and becoming the coach was so impressive. And the way that he speaks to the players, that he has their respect immediately. He has the knowledge and the detail, and he's probably ready for a step up. Whether he's ready to be the head coach with all of everything else that goes with it, only those inside Leicester will really know. But they've got a really effective setup there, where they've been doing a lot of work to find potential replacements for Steve. And I guess now the work just has to be brought forward a few months. But it's a challenge because it was a great piece of recruitment to bring in Steve Borthwick. He took them from the very bottom to the very top. They've now lost two of the most important players of last season in Ellis Genge and George Ford. And of course, Andre Pollard wasn't fit when he first arrived at Leicester Tigers. So they haven't hit the same heights, but they've got a squad of players there, and they've got a strategy, an intelligent backroom team who I'm sure will mitigate the loss as best they can. And it will be a loss because he's proven already in a relatively young coaching career how impressive he can be. And I think just to your point there about the impact that a new coach can make, Steve Borthwick knows most of those players already, and they know him and they respect him enormously. So while some of them are talking publicly about how bruised they feel at losing Eddie Jones this close to the World Cup, it's not like a new coach will have to come in and win them over. They already respect everything Steve Borthwick stands for, and that will really help. And with the qualities he'll bring, and the respect he already has within the squad, I think that will help England kind of enjoy that new coach bounce that they're clearly after.
Agreed. And you imagine Steve's got some ideas of where he wants to implement some change proactively, sort of immediately, and it's kind of exciting to see where that team could go. But that sort of England, Eddie Jones, Leicester, Steve Borthwick story sort of parked. But now I want to transition to what's going on in the Premiership, because I believe the Premiership just announced almost sort of a relaunch for the 24-25 season, and I believe you were there for the announcement.
Yeah, it's a relaunch to a degree. It covers a lot of what you and I would have spoken about on previous episodes of the Scrum Down. About it's kind of dry in a way, but it's about governance. It's about oversight, about decision making within the Premiership. Now, effectively this year has exposed fault lines in the governance of the Premiership, and if you recall, we've spoken about the decision making structure in the league required at the start of the season all 13 clubs to vote on big decisions. There are now only 11, but it requires all 11 to vote. And you were having situations where, for example, when they tried to redraw the fixture list after the loss of Wasps and Worcester, they couldn't reach an agreement because all the clubs had to vote on it. And there were some clubs almost being petty to prove a point. Clubs who'd had decisions that had gone against them in the past were now voting against a new set of fixtures because almost to prove a point. You had clubs who might have disagreed with it because it didn't suit them, even if it suited everyone else. And it was a handbrake to progress, this system. Now, Simon Massey-Taylor, the chief exec, when he took over in January, said, we need to change this. We need a commissioner, as he called it. Well, they haven't got one person at the top. They're going to spend the rest of this season creating a sporting commission which will have the authority to make these key sporting decisions without having to throw it out to all the clubs. It would allow decisions to be made more quickly, and a kind of a crucial but subtle difference. The decisions can be made on what this commission believe is best for the league, rather than each club voting for what's best for them, and then you often struggle to reach a consensus. So that is a key structural difference that was in train from January, but has been accelerated because of the loss of Wasps and Worcester Warriors, and the fact that the executives really felt that they did have their hands tied because they actually didn't have any decision-making power at Premiership Rugby. And a lot of the criticism that's been aimed at Premiership Rugby down the years has been because they haven't acted. And one of the reasons is to act requires consensus or supermajority a lot of the time. And that was always very slow and very hard to achieve. So the hope there now is that it'll be an independent body. There won't be any specific club representatives on it. They can make decisions on what's best for the league, which will help grow and modernise and evolve the competition. And part of this strategy has involved the recruitment of a new position called the head of growth. And the person they've recruited has come from cricket, and in English cricket there's been this revolutionary new competition which hasn't gone down all that well with traditionalists, but all the kids are watching it, and it's on mainstream television, and this man Caborn has been brought in to help bring that same kind of thinking to the Premiership. So that's one element. Another element which is directly related to the loss of Wasps and Worcester Warriors is a new financial oversight panel, which will sit independently of the Premiership and will be modelled on the system they have in France. It won't be a direct replica because it'll need to be bespoke to suit the English system. But it will. The way it works in France is that no club in the Premiership, or the top 14, I beg your pardon, or the second tier, can begin the season without opening their books to this independent auditing process, so that the competition can be certain that the clubs are not going to go bust and that it won't impact on the credibility of the competition, which I know that the Premiership wished they could have done before this season and didn't have the power to do it. They now do. The third element, and probably the most interesting to fans, is what will the Premiership look like in 2024-25? And that decision will be made in the coming weeks. It has to be, because how the league looks in 2 seasons' time impacts what they do for next season in terms of promotion and relegation, Ealing potentially coming up. So that decision, will it go down to a 10-team league, will be taken in conjunction with this new deal that's being discussed with the RFU, which comes into force in 2024. The television contracts come into force in 2024. There's a desire to strengthen the second tier, again, emulating what they have in France, so that relegation isn't such a scary prospect. Clubs don't risk going bust by getting relegated, and it will require a whole new model, different funding streams. The broadcast deal, as in France, will probably include the Championship as it's now known. That will probably become known as something like Premiership 2. So those games will be broadcast as well, maybe in different slots in the week, so that you can create a narrative. If you drop a team from the Premiership down into a 10-team second tier, if Wasps and Worcester can resume playing in that competition, it strengthens it. These are the ideas that are currently being discussed. And I know I've thrown a lot at you there, but those are the 3 kind of key elements: the financial oversight, quicker, better decision making, and a new league structure for the top flight and the second tier to come in 2024.
And so will all of this not be enacted till 24? So like the financial oversight, those committees, it will still stay as is for the remainder of 2023?
For the remainder, it's going to take until the end of this season for the commission and the financial oversight panel to be, I guess, recruited and appointed. They have to go through a proper process to get those in place. That'll take the rest of this season. But they will be in place for the start of next season. And will work in conjunction with the RFU. Particularly the financial oversight panel will work in conjunction with the RFU because they're the regulator of the league. They still have to sign off who's suitable to own a Premiership club. But the intention is that will happen by the end of this season. The decision on what happens in 2024 will be taken this season, but it's too late for it to be enacted for next year. That'll happen in 2 seasons' time. But the process is happening. It was the chief executive and the new chairman, when they arrived in January, they set out this vision, and it was moving slowly. They were trying to get there, and I think this whole process has been accelerated by the crisis that the league has been through in the last few months.
And then what do you think this is a positive step? Do you think this will fix a lot of the problems? Do you think it's just, scratching the surface of some of the issues Premiership Rugby face? What do you make of this plan?
I think it's a step in the right direction. I don't think it can fix everything overnight. I think the Financial Oversight Panel clearly is designed to avoid any repeat of a Wasps or a Worcester situation. It's designed to identify red flags early to ensure that if there's an issue, it can be dealt with at the time instead of growing to the point where two established clubs, one of whom's got a massive history in Europe and the Premiership of winning trophies, and Wasps' 155-year history up in smoke. We still don't know, incidentally, whether those two clubs will be able to resume playing next season or not. That they were supposed to have been in order to join the Championship next season, a takeover deal had to have been completed by earlier this week, and they weren't. The RFU have given them an extension, but only till Christmas. So they've got a week and a half, 2 weeks, in order to complete any takeover deal if they want to resume in the Championship next season. You've got to say at this stage it's looking unlikely.
So the latest of that was it Jim O'Toole, and is that bid still in play for Worcester?
Yeah, there's a bid in play with Worcester, led by Jim O'Toole, the former chief executive, and we understand there's a bid in play at Wasps, led by called the Wasps Legends, a collection of former players who have business connections. Both cases are very, very different. Wasps don't have a ground to play at. The Wasps Legends are trying to get the team playing, but they need to find somewhere to play. That's a very different situation to Worcester, where they have a stadium and they have facilities. They just need to get a deal done before Christmas if Worcester are going to join the Championship next season. So that remains uncertain.
So, Alex, is there any update with what is going to happen with the P share of these clubs? Because my understanding was they both applied for non-fault insolvency, and they were both rejected by a RFU or Premiership Rugby panel. I'm not sure whose panel, but maybe you are. Yeah,
it was. It's an RFU-led panel, and that was always likely to happen. So the clubs, when they went bust, they were suspended for the rest of the season and relegated to the Championship as punishment. But they had the right of appeal if they could convince the RFU that the insolvency wasn't their fault, that it was caused by COVID. Both clubs failed to prove that, which confirmed that if they're going to return to rugby, they'll return in the Championship next season. In terms of the P share, which is one of the shares that guarantees some central funding to clubs, they're going to lose their P share. The league are effectively going to buy them back, which will generate about £9 million for each club, which will go into paying off some of the debts that they have, some of the creditors they have. And the whole existence of the P share is going to form part of these wider discussions, I think, because if you have a Premiership 1 and a Premiership 2, but Premiership 1 all own a P share that is worth, at the moment, if you're insolvent, is worth 9 million. On the open market, they're valued up to about 20 million by some clubs because of the value put on the league when CVC invested. But if you've got the League 1 that has a P share and League 2 that doesn't, then you're never gonna grow the second tier to be anywhere close to competing with the first. So I believe that's an area that's going to have to form part of the discussions over the new model of professional English rugby, certainly covering the top two leagues over the course of the next year, 18 months.
And that's an interesting point, mate. When you look at the P share, and obviously that they've lost it for now. What does this P share model look like going forward? Is massive, because like you're saying, the haves and have-nots. If you want to have a sustainable Prem 2, what is it? Is it currently 250,000 is what the clubs get in the Championship, and then the Prem clubs from their P share, what are they getting? 5 million, something something in that range? Is that how big the disparity is?
It's those figures aren't quite on the money, but the general point stands. Yeah, the funding that a Championship club gets is minute compared to the Premiership. That's not all through the P share. There are other funding streams, but the vision that I think that they're going to work towards for this relaunch of professional club rugby in England, as they're terming it, has to be that they work to that the two leagues are treated as one entity, if you like. Now you could have. I spoke to one club owner who was on board with the idea that Premiership 1 might have a higher salary cap than Premiership 2, just so that and therefore Premiership 2 could end up being perhaps a fascinating league with younger players who at the moment don't play a huge amount of rugby. They might play in the Premiership Cup or an A-League game now and again, but they can go months without playing. Well, maybe there's a home for some of those players in Premiership 2. They'd have to approach the whole funding model differently, because the P share at the moment, if Wasps and Worcester come back or if Ealing want to buy a P share, it's going to cost them 20-30 million pounds to buy a P share, and that just keeps this divide bigger, almost unbridgeable. It's unbridgeable, and the RFU themselves have said at the moment it's unbridgeable. So how do you create a system where relegation, if you get relegated from Premiership 1 into Premiership 2, like happens in France, you go from the top 14 to Pro League, you're still in a super competitive league that is attractive to TV viewers, is selling out all around the country. That's the model they need to get to. And I can't see how you can get there without restructuring the whole P-share system or the whole funding. It's all part of the wider funding model. And that, I think, will be connected to this agreement with the RFU that I discussed. It'll be connected to a new broadcasting deal. They need to overhaul the model of professional club rugby, and they recognise that's what they're working towards.
And if you look at the P share and this issue and it having to be restructured, how do you factor in the CVC ownership or their rights to, is it 27% or 29%? I'm not 100% sure of that P share revenue as part of their investment buy-in. Like how does that get achieved when they're at the table and they deserve they're entitled to that big piece of the pie?
So they're only entitled to 27% of commercial income, which is actually part of the funding or part of the revenue issues that the clubs have. So the next TV deal that's done, 27% of that will go to CVC, which means that each club will actually earn a lower percentage from the next TV deal. So the next TV deal has to be more than 27% uplift on what the current one is with BT Sport for the clubs to actually earn any more money. So CVC get a stake in the commercial revenues of the Premiership. In terms of funding from the RFU, that isn't affected by also that's not CVC don't claim 27% of the RFU's central funding, but they would earn a massive stake from any title sponsorship, any revenue from TV deals, that kind of thing, and that's part of the issue. Like the clubs, those P share or the member clubs of the Premiership, which were 13, they all took their lump sum cash from the CVC investment pre-COVID, and it's all gone. So that money's gone, but they're left with this agreement where they will earn less, a smaller share of any commercial deal going forward. Now, the money went, COVID didn't help. So any new deals have to be a massive uplift. Now, I think the TV deal should be easier to reach that level because the existing one, the Premiership Rugby's previous executives, did such a horrible job in negotiating it that they got no uplift at all. Again, you look to France, and the size of the television deal in France it dwarfs that in England. It shows what is possible, and the clubs need an enormous uplift in order to earn any more money from TV than they currently do.
Mate, well said. Well said. I think it's an important aspect. This and this is hopefully an exciting time for the Premiership. Still a lot of hurdles to get through, but at least a step forward for change and the betterment. But Alex, I really appreciate you coming on. You know, asked you a lot of questions there. You dished out a lot of info, so I'm very, very grateful, as I'm sure our listeners and viewers are as well. So, mate, thank you so much for your time. Reminded everyone to keep checking out, you know, his Twitter feed, his articles, constantly reporting on the latest of what's going on around the rugby sort of news, especially in the UK, but also around the world. So, mate, thanks again for all your time. We really appreciate it.
No, anytime, Corbs. And yeah, sorry if I talked a lot and threw a lot of information at you, but it's been one of those weeks where there's just a hell of a lot to talk about.
No, I appreciate it, mate. It's why we get you on. Thank you so much. See you soon, all right?
See you next time.
And great to have Alex on, as always. That is a wrap on this week's episode. Really appreciate the insights. A lot of detail and information in there, but I think it's important. I think it's a good place for us to be covering it. You know, the England head coach role impacts us massively here at NBC Sports with the Six Nations under our banner coming at you in February. And then we also have Premiership Rugby, every game available live on Peacock TV and on demand. So don't miss that. Really good insight from everyone. You know, touched on some USA Rugby at the beginning of the show. We'll probably look to have a USA Rugby guest on next week, as we didn't get to get a Sevens player on to react to those successful weekends. But from everyone here at NBC Sports and the Scrum Down and me personally, thanks so much for the continued listening, sharing, liking, favoriting, retweeting, watching us on YouTube. Our views, our numbers are growing. We appreciate it, and we'll see you again next time.